Hey creeps! When this video comes out, I'll be at Midsummer Scream, the world's largest Halloween and horror convention. Midsummer Scream is deemed the official kickoff to spooky season for a reason. They have the Hall of Shadows, which is a completely dark hall filled with over a dozen haunted attractions. They have a show floor with 350 plus vendors, all with their own Halloween and horror themed wares. They have panels, they have celebrity guests, they even have a kitty lounge this year where you can go pet and adopt kitties. Now because this is such a special event, I want outfits perfect for the occasion, which got me thinking, I should make something. Welcome to the channel, the place to come for spooky, DIY home and lifestyle content all year long. Let's go make an outfit for Midsummer Scream. I decided to go with Vogue's 9167 pattern in View D for my Midsummer Scream dress build. I had a decision to make when it came to fabric, but ultimately went with the vacuum form mask print because the amount of fabric I had of this one was closer to the amount recommended for my size. Just in case you're unfamiliar with pattern sizing, pattern sizes do run small, so don't feel bad if you find yourself qualifying for a size that's twice as big as your typical size. To begin, I like to peruse the instruction sheets inside the pattern and then mark off the pattern pieces on the first page of the instructions that I need to locate and use. One of my secrets to getting all the pattern sheets folded up to be able to fit back into the envelope is to keep unfolding to a minimum. I only unfold the sheets I need to, and I may not unfold a sheet I need all the way, just enough to get the pieces that I need. What can I say? I'm a bit of a professional, if there is such a thing, when it comes to pattern folding. If I had to guess, I think determining which fold of a set of folds was folded first comes naturally to a brain that loves process mapping. After getting all the pieces I needed for my dress, it was then time to get into cutting. Zinnia was there to supervise, taking on her alternate persona of Zinnie the Pooh, distracting the hired help from their job duties with some minor wardrobe sabotage, then instead of causing the distraction, becoming distracted, and finally satisfied with a peace offering. I tried to match the print around most seams, meaning that the print appears seamless with the strategic way that the fabric is cut. But in some cases the print was challenging to match. I think with the scale of the print, the size of my pattern pieces, and the half drop of the print with the columns repeating every fourth column, all these variables contributed to how tricky this was. One pro tip that I do to match the fabric print for mirrored pieces is to use the first cut piece as the pattern piece for the second piece. This way you can visually match the print of both the fabric and cut piece before cutting. Because I didn't have quite enough vacuum form mask material for the entire dress, I used a solid navy cotton for my side front and back bodice pieces. I'll include a link for the vintage Halloween mask material that I used for my dress by Maria Faith Garcia so that you can get some too. Once I had all my shell and liner parts cut, I moved on to sewing. To start, I assembled both my bodice shell and bodice liner by sewing up the center front seams and princess seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Most patterns have a standard 5/8 seam allowance unless otherwise notated. So that my seams would press out flat, I made snips in any curved seam allowances. With the fronts and backs assembled of the bodice shell and liner, I could then sew up the shoulder seams. Because I wanted to test out the fit before sewing the liner to the shell, I basted the side seams and most of the center back closed with a long stitch length for easy removal later. After trying on my bodice shell, I determined that I needed to remove 3/4 of an inch from each of the princess seams above the bust line and remove 1/4 inch from each of the back princess seams. To do this, I turned the bodice shell inside out, took out the center of the shoulder seams to get access to the princess seams, and then transferred these alterations to the inside of the garment with a ruler and pin. I sewed along the marked stitch line, then cut away the fabric excess, leaving 5/8 seam allowance just in case I needed to make further alterations. I prefer to do one princess seam at a time so that I can use the altered seam as a template for the corresponding side. I matched up the tops and bottoms of my front princess seams, then used a pen to trace the altered seam outline to my unaltered side. Seeing how much I cut away from the altered side then provides my stitch line using a ruler to measure out 5/8 from the seam edge. I repeated these steps to also do the back princess seam alterations, and then again for the bodice liner. Now that my bodice shell and liner were altered, I could then sew them together. To do this, I removed the basting from the side and back seams of the shell, then pinned the shell and liner together along the neckline, matching seams and notches with right sides together. I thought this would be a great time to press the seams open of my bodice, as well as do some more snips around my curved neckline seams before doing the armholes and understitching. Before sewing the armholes, I thought it would be easier to do the understitching along the neckline. Understitching is done to keep the liner inside the garment and not rolling out along the neckline and armholes. Just simply press the seam allowance, joining the liner and shell toward the liner side, and stitch 1/8 of an inch from the seam on the liner as far as possible. I then repeated the neckline finishing steps for the armholes. With the neckline and armholes finished, I could then turn the bodice right side out and sew up the side seams. I moved on to the skirt, choosing to go with all French seams, joining the front skirt panels as well as the side seams. A French seam is where you enclose the raw edges of the fabric, giving the inside of the garment a clean finish, void of unraveling fabric edges. To do this, first sew a 3/8 inch seam with the pieces wrong sides together. Press the seam open, then trim away about 1/4 of an inch from each seam side. With the right sides together, sew another 3/8 seam. For all the pleats, I transferred the reference marks from the patterns to the wrong sides of the pieces. I then connected the reference marks with a straight line for sewing ease. To keep the center pleat in place, I flattened it, matching both center seams, then sewed 3/8 of an inch along the top. The pattern recommended to sew each side at the bottom of the pleat, making sure not to catch the front of the skirt. For the seams joining the center and side front panels of the skirt, I repeated the French seam steps used on the center front seam. Then repeated the steps done to do the first pleat and finish the raw edge left exposed by the pleat. I've been wanting to go to Midsummer Scream for easily 3 years now, and this is the year that my husband and I finally get to go. I'm so excited to meet some of the small business owners that I purchased from over the years, as well as become acquainted with new shops. I'm excited to walk through the haunts on the scare floor, say hey to fellow content creators, and sit in some of the amazing panel presentations being offered this year. I sewed my center back seam, noting the bottom of the zipper opening mark, but not as a fringe seam. I did this because the seam will have the zipper sewn into it later. Matching the pocket pieces with the top edge of the skirt and side seams, I attached these with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and then some understitching to keep them in place. With right sides together, I was able to sew the skirt side seams, matching seams and notches. This included the roughly 3-inch long seam from the top of the skirt, creating the pocket opening. Because I can't help myself, I decided to wrap the side seams in some pre-made extra wide double fold bias tape, which I had in my stash, which explains why I went with teal. Because I wasn't sure how well the bias tape would lay where the bottom of the pocket meets the side seam, I decided to break the bias into 2 lengths, one along the side seam, the other around the pocket bag. Using bias tape can turn into an awkward origami session, strategically folding the edges to reduce bulk while also concealing any fabric or bias raw edges. For the hem, I went with a single fold bias tape, but this could have been done by folding the edge over twice, then stitching near the folded edge on the inside of the skirt. Once the skirt and bodice were finished, it was time to do the waist seam. Matching up the seams and notches of the shell only, I sewed this seam with a 5/8 seam allowance, then again at 3/8 to reinforce the seam. To sew in the zipper, I first basted the rest of the center back seam, then pinned the zipper tape to each side of the seam allowance, to later hand baste the zipper tape and seam sides together, allowing me to remove the pins. I could then do the zipper top stitching. I marked the bottom of the zipper with a pin, then proceeded to sew 3/8 of an inch from the center back seam all the way around the zipper teeth. Once done with top stitching, I gently removed the basting over the zipper teeth. The final step was to sew the liner to the shell. I folded over all the liner raw edges along the waistline and zipper 5/8 of an inch, and then slip stitch the liner to the shell. I really love how this dress turned out. The one thing that I would probably do differently is I would choose a different dress pattern where the skirt wasn't pleated. Although I took the time to match up the fabric when I was cutting, when I went to go pleat the skirt, the fabric didn't line up quite as nicely as I had hoped. But overall, I do love the inclusion of the vacuum form mass and a bright, bold color palette for the fabric, and that I took the time to make alterations to customize the fit. I want to take another moment to acknowledge the artist who designed the fabric that I used for my dress, and that's Maria Faith Garcia. And if you would like some of this fabric too in this design, I have the fabric link in the video description. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. And thank you so much for visiting my creepy craft corner of the internet and for watching till the end. And let's see those final shots.